Installing active sidelights can be pretty challenging, but installing active sidelights that are only 12 inches wide can be seriously challenging, especially if the center door swings out and the sidelights swing in. I always start something that's really challenging with a drawing, and I had Todd Murdoch's help with this one. Check this out and you'll see what I'm talking about. This is the sill that I'll be building with the back-to-back moles in the center and the two JAMB legs on the outside. Let's take a closer look. There are several features you got to see with this project right from the start, or you're going to face serious frustration and probably certain failure. First, you have to understand that the unit has active sidelights that swing into the room and the center door swings outside. And two moles separate the sidelights from the door. And the jambs that make up those moles have to face opposite directions. Yeah, this can get really confusing. Again, the sidelights swing in and the door swings out over the sloped sill. The bevel on the sill is there so the sill will drain outside, but the sill is flat underneath the sidelights. It's complicated. And the sidelights will need screens. So those jambs, including the head jambs, have to be rabbited for screens. Fortunately, the screen rabbets also solve a big problem with the exterior head casing. Notice that the screen rabbets make it possible to hold an even reveal on the head jamb beneath the casing. Otherwise, there'd be a lot more jamb exposed over the sidelights. And another surprise, the interior of the swing out door jamb must also be cut with a screen rabbet. Otherwise, there'd be a lot more jamb exposed over the door. One other big ticket item to catch before starting any shop work: the sidelights are only 12 inches wide, which means the angle of the bevels on the strike stiles must be steeper than a regular door. A standard bevel is only 2 to 3 degrees, but these narrow sidelights, they've got to have a minimum 6-degree bevel in order to clear the strike jamb. So here's the oak sill I milled. This is the first thing I did. I cut this out of a piece of 4x6 oak actually, and then I let it sit here for several days just to make sure it wasn't going to move again. And when I cut it, I left it on the fat side. In case it did move again, I could run it through my joiner and my surface player once more, but it didn't. It's perfectly flat all the way. So now that I've got a nice flat and straight piece of wood, I can cut the bevel on here. Now I got to cut the bevel or chamfer on this sill so that it'll drain water. And to do that, I ripped this little piece of 1/4 inch. It's just a scrap sacrificial piece, and I'm going to tack it to the front bottom of this sill, which is going to raise this end up. And then when I run it through my surface planer, you can see that it daylights out right here and gives me a nice angle across that sill so it'll drain water. Now it daylights out 2 inches from the inside, the back of the inside of the sill, and that'll give me a nice 2-inch flat spot for the swing in sidelights. So yeah, this sill has a big crack in it, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to fill this with epoxy, and the crack on the opposite side will end up being filled with epoxy too, and I'll probably put a little blue color in it to make it look kind of sweet. If I was doing this for a client, there's no way I could use a sill with a crack in it. They'd probably have a fit at the imperfection. But the folks I'll be doing this for are just going to love that blue epoxy. My pencil line is still here. My chamfer comes right up to it. So I've still got my nice 2-inch flat, and I got my bevel so the water will run off. So now all of our JAMB stock has a screen rabbet cut in it. I have these 2 mock-ups, one for this side of the JAMB and one for the opposite side of the JAMB. Remember, the two JAMB legs that go on the outside of the JAMB go all the way to the bottom of the sill, whereas the back-to-back moles that go in the center of the sill, they're just going to get mortised into the sill, and we'll talk about those later. All I have to do is take this mock-up piece and flush it up
Here's the inside of the jamb and the inside of the sill. Now that they're flush, I'll just take a pencil and score a line right across the top of the rabbet. If you look closely, you'll see that that line is actually at an angle, and it mirrors the angle of the bevel on the sill. So I set my mock-up up against this piece of scrap, which pushes my material out further so my blade will be able to cut through this entire rabbet. And now I'm going to swing the saw, and that laser kind of helps, doesn't it? I'm going to swing the saw until it lines up, till the laser lines up with that bevel line, and lock it down. And I've already set the depth stop on my saw. So it won't cut through the jamb itself, through the face of the rabbet. It'll only cut the top of the rabbet. And there is the rabbeted jamb, nice and tight against the bevel on the sill and up against the jamb. Now, of course, we're not going to fasten a jamb leg right here on the very end of the sill. We've got to have a horn out here to collect or provide a place of termination or resolution for the exterior trim, for the trim to sit on. So that means we're going to put a notch in here like this, and this jamb leg is going to sit in here. So the next thing to do is to figure out just how deep that notch has to be. I'm going to be using 1x4, 3.5-inch material for the exterior trim. So I'm going to come in an extra inch and come to 4.5. So that is going to be the actual end of the sill, although the horn is going to come clear out to here. So my jamb leg is going to sit just like this. So the rabbet on the jamb is right against that notch, and this would be the back of the jamb. That's the back of the notch. So the notch is going to come this way, and I'll take out this piece of wood. And this piece right in here that's remaining, the horn that's remaining, that right now is about 1.5 inches, is going to give me more than enough room to terminate the trim. I'll be able to drop the trim right on top of this horn, and I'll have, almost 3/4 of an inch of reveal of the horn remaining after the trim is installed. All I have to do is draw a line here. Now, we got to lay out this end too, but we can't. We can't lay out this end until we lay out the 2 back-to-back mulls. If you're catching on to what I'm doing here, I'm not going to use arithmetic and add this stuff up. I make too many mistakes when I do that. I'm going to actually measure straight from this rabbet across to the next rabbet on the back-to-back mull and place each one of those mulls, and then I'll end up with my final OD length measurement on my sill. So in order to do that, we need mock-ups of the back-to-back mulls. So I've made those exactly the same way I made those single jambs, but these are a little bit tricky because they're handed. You can't take this one and use it for this mull on this side, because look, the rabbet for the inside is on this side. It matches the rabbet in this jamb. The side lights are going to swing in. So here's your in swing rabbet, whereas the door swings out. So here's your out swing rabbet right in the center. This one is exactly the opposite. So they're not reversible. So be careful of that. If you're going to make one of these units, make sure that you recognize that these things aren't reversible. And now you can see exactly what we're going to do. Now we know exactly where the ID of that sill is, right at the rabbet for the in-swing door. So now all I have to do is pull a tape from that ID to the ID right here at 12 inches. So that's the ID for the side light. And I'll put my mock-up right here, line it up with that pencil line, and make a mark right on the little rabbet for the screen rabbet. And that is the other mark. So that gives us the back-to-back mull location right here. Now I'm going to measure across the door. The door is 32 inches, and I'll just bump my tape right against that line. I could burn an inch, but sometimes when I burn the inch, I forgot to add it back in. So I'm just gonna bump my tape, measure to 32 inches, which is the measurement for that 2/8 door. And again, here's the screen rabbet. I'll line that up with this mark. And I can line up the swing out rabbet for the jamb right there. And I can make the mark on the opposite side for the swing in rabbet, the side light. There's our back-to-back mole. So I have one more opening to lay out. I'll butt my tape measure again right against the ID of that swing in side light and make a mark at 12 inches. And that leaves me, 4 7/16.
Good.
But no fear, because when I laid out these horns, I added extra to them, like 3/4 of an inch or so I can trim the length off on the horns anytime I want. So now let's look at how we're going to cut the mortises and let these back-to-back moles into that sill. I'm going to make a template really similar to this one. It's got the two sides on and it's got the two end blocks in the center, but it also has a rail on the back. And the rail is long, so I can put a clamp, 2 clamps across here to secure this. It also has a stop in the front, so it doesn't move too much when you slide it around, but you still need to clamp it to secure it. And then one last thing you should notice, it has this little strip of wood back here. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick, and that's going to depend upon the degree or the angle of the slope that you cut on your sill. But that's there so it'll level this whole template out. When I make my mortise, the mortise will have a flat bottom, and when I set my back-to-back mole in that mortise, it'll straighten it up so it's perfectly square and plumb. And this mortise doesn't have to be deep. It only has to be about 1/4 of an inch. And I could actually cut it so it daylights out at the bottom of the chamfer. I'm really cutting that mortise in there so it'll key the back-to-back mole in place. And that way, when I put fasteners and glue in this thing, this back-to-back mole will not move at all. So I'm going to put some glue on the spacer, and I'll spray the rails. We'll wait for that glue to dry. Now this piece I'm not going to glue in, because I may want to use this template again down the road, and that way I can, for a different size mole. Let's say I've got a wider mole, I can slide this piece back out and screw it back in and use the same template for a wider mole. The next step is to set this inside stop that's going to slide against the inside of the sill, the edge of the sill. Now I don't want to set it here. I want to set, and I don't want to set it flush with my template. I want to set it inside the template quite a ways, and that way when I run my router will come clean out the back of the sill and make a nice, clean, sharp cut. And once I fasten this in place, I can measure off of it to position this sliding stop on the inside of the template. Now I can measure off that stop. The jamb is 4 5/8, 4 9/16, and that means I should make the depth of this 4 5/8 and add a 1/16 of an inch for the template guide that's on my router. So that means that is the exact location for this end of the template. Now I can take the guide rail from the outside and just clamp it right to the bottom of the template. Now I'll just position that little filler strip right inside and tack it in place. You'll notice I sanded the rough spots off of my template so it's easier to slide my router around. And my router has a template guide in it, so I won't chew up my template, and that's what gives me that 1/16 inch offset. And I'm going to set my router up so it's at the downhill bottom end of the slope on that sill and drop my bit until it just touches the oak sill. That way when I cut my mortise, it'll daylight out right at the face of the outside of the back-to-back mole. And I can start my router up right there and make my cut. Ooh, nice. It doesn't move at all side to side, can't twist it at all. And when it's flush here, it daylights out perfectly right in the front. So here's what we'll end up with. Side light, wrap it on the inside, and measures exactly 12 inches dead on. I've got the sill clamped here so it's perfectly plumb because it's clamped to this block, and the block is clamped right down to my table here. That means the sill is perfectly plumb. I've cut the bottoms of these mole legs exactly the same way I did the mock-ups, which is long. I mean, it's the same length as the outside legs. But for the mole legs, I got to cut them shorter. And to do that, I'm going to butt them up inside the pocket on the sill. And I've got the sill clamped in position so it's perfectly plumb. I've got a clamp securing it to a block of wood, and the block of wood clamped to my table. And that way, when I butt this mole leg up against the sill, it's perfectly at a right angle. I spread my scribes open and then close them so that the lead just touches the shoulder of that notch in the bottom of that mole leg. And that is exactly how much I have to take off the bottom of this jamb, right there. And that is a square cut. Now here's what's left at the bottom of that mole, and it keys into that pocket and makes a nice tight fit. With both back-to-back moles cut, I can take the spacer and drop it between them, and I put a clamp on that. And now I can put temporary fasteners through the bottom of the sill up into the back-to-back mole, and I'm going to be ready almost to mark the lengths on the tops of the jamb legs. Because remember, having scribed the bottoms of some of these jamb legs to the top of the sill, et cetera, and some of them go all the way to the bottom of the sill, each one is probably a little bit different length. So I'm going to make a story pole to find out exactly how tall each one of these jamb legs needs to be. Through hole in the sill, pilot hole up into the jamb, not too deep because it's a polyfiber jamb. You can't take too much stress. You can't torque that screw too much. Oh yeah, nice and tight. I'm going to use this piece of doorstop as a story pole, hook my tape on the bottom of it. I'm going to make a mark right here at 79 1/4. That is the height of the doors and the side lights. I'm also going to put a 1/2 inch door shoe on the bottom of all of them. And I could mark a 1/2 inch now from that 79 1/4, but on the side lights, I want to cut them a little bit so that the door is long enough to still sweep and engage the sill. Remember, it bevels out. So I'm going to make this mark at 79 1/2, which will mean I'll have to take 1/4 inch off of the side lights here, plus 1/8 inch for door gap at the head jamb. But that would be the ID of the jamb. And I mean, that would be the inside dimension of the jamb. And I want to make a mark at the outside of the head jamb. So that's another 3/4 inch from this mark. I'm just going to slide my tape down and make a mark now 3/4 inch above that one. And this is the OD length of the jamb. So I'll just make a nice clean mark across my story pole. That means I can take the story pole and butt it right up against the sill and make a mark on the top of every jam leg. And I'm only marking the swing-in jams. I'll transfer my lines on the back-to-back mauls. From the swing-in jam to the swing-out jam. We made a router jig to cut the rabbet off the top of the jams. Rabbit the rabbit. We could have used a miter saw for that, but if you use a miter saw to cut the rabbet off the top of the jam, if you go too deep, you'll scar the exposed face of the rabbet where the door or the sidelight's going to swing. Now, you don't have to worry about doing that when you're doing the sill, because if you scar it like this, the sill covers it. Because this jam is rabbeted, the head jam's rabbeted too, it leaves this section exposed. So that's why we're using a router jig. I'm using my favorite router for this. I love this Bosch router and always have. I've used it for years. It's a 1613. I don't think Bosch makes anything even like it anymore. The depth release for the plunge mechanism is right here on the left, so you can reach it with your thumb on your left hand really easily, and the trigger for the motor is right here on the right, so you can operate this router so easily. It's extremely ergonomical. But what's really unusual about this router is I can take it and drop it down until it touches the piece of wood, the material that I want to cut. And then with this knob right here, I can back it off a 16th or a 32nd. It's incredibly easy to dial it back. No other router has that kind of depth control. All of them have, instead, they have these little depth stops, and you have to loosen the little lock knob. You have to drop the stop onto the turret. You have to put a spacer in there and then lock this in again and keep kind of trying to dial in the exact depth or something. Whereas with this router, you can adjust the depth right here. I'll take the router, I release the lock mechanism, drop it down onto the jam stock, and slide it back and forth. You can hear it rubbing against the jam stock. So now all I have to do is back it off, and there's a 16th, so there's a 32nd. Nice and flush right across the rabbet, and a perfect fit, flush at the back of the head jam too. Now all I have to do is cut this rabbet on the top of every jam leg. I've temporarily fastened all the jam legs to the sill. And I've also temporarily fastened the back-to-back jams to themselves. I haven't glued them together yet because I want to be able to take them apart so I can pre-finish them. It'll be a lot easier if I can lay them flat on the table and just spray them. Now the head is a different story. Usually the head is continuous on most jams. The head runs all the way across the top of the jams because I've got a swing-in sidelight and a swing-out door and another swing-in sidelight at the other end. I've got to use 3 jam heads. So I can't just fasten all of them right through the back of the jam legs like I have these fasteners pre-drilled here. Instead, I pre-drilled some pocket holes so I can fasten all the centers to each other through those with pocket screws. And keep in mind, these polyfiber jams from Plastpro aren't wood. Don't want to just drive a screw in there real hard with an impact driver. It'll strip out very easily. Normally I'd swing these doors like right here, but since this is a swing out, swing in, I'm going to take this jamb and set it up in the back of my shop in a temporary wall so I can mortise for the hinges and swing the doors without having to turn the thing upside down. And that'll also show you another way to swing a pre-hung door.